The handcuffs went on at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday in March in Terminal C of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport at Gate C-14, while the boarding announcement for Flight 1184 to Joint Base Lewis McChord was playing through the overhead speakers for the second time, and 31 people in the Group 2 line were doing what people do in airport boarding lines, looking at their phones, checking their bags, shifting their weights from one foot to the other, which is to say, not one of them was doing anything except standing there. And neither was the soldier. The soldier had been in that line for 9 minutes. He was wearing his Army service uniform, the dress greens, pressed the night before at the Hampton Inn on Sullivan Road, with the care and precision of a man who had been pressing that uniform for 11 years and understood that how you wore it was not a personal preference, but a professional obligation. His name tape was above his right breast pocket. His rank was on his collar. East unit patch was on his left shoulder. There was nothing ambiguous about who he was or what he was wearing, or why he was standing in a commercial boarding line at 6:38 in the morning. Airport police officer Randall Schiff arrived at 6:44 a.m. in response to a call logged at 6:41 a.m. reporting a black male, tall, military-style clothing, behaving in an agitated manner near Gate C-12. The soldier was standing in the boarding line at Gate C-14. He was reading his boarding pass. Gate 12 was 47 feet behind him and to the left and had been empty since its last departure at 6:15 a.m. Officer Schiff looked at the line. He looked at the soldier. He walked over. He asked the soldier to step out of the line. The soldier stepped out without speaking, the way a man steps out of a line when he has already done a rapid internal calculation about how this moment needs to go. Officer Stiff asked for his identification. The soldier, his name was Tobena Nwasu, Sergeant First Class, 2nd Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division, United States Army, put the boarding pass in his left hand and reached into his right breast pocket for his military ID and his passport, which he carried together in a single plastic sleeve. Ase had on every trip for 11 years. He extended both. Officer Schiff took them. He did not look at them. He told Tovena to put his bag on the ground. Tovena put his bag on the ground. It told him to keep his hands visible. Tovena kept his hands visible. Then Schiff said he was going to need him to come along. Tovena sighed, without raising his voice, that his flight was boarding. He could hear the Group 2 announcement, could see the line moving through the gate. Schiff said that was not his concern. Tovena asked once what the basis for the detention was. Schiff told him to watch his language. Then, the handcuffs came out at 6:47 a.m. The 31 people in the Group 2 boarding line at Gate C-14 continued boarding. A woman near the front looked at her phone. A man 2 people back adjusted his laptop bag strap and looked at the floor. The gate agent, a young woman whose lanyard read Delta Atlanta Hub, glanced at the scene and looked back at her monitor and kept scanning boarding passes without calling anyone. The fluorescent overheads in Terminal C were doing what they always did, flooding everything in the same flat, merciless light that makes 6:47 a.m. look exactly like every other hour. The light that erases shadow and texture and makes it easier to not see what is directly in front of you. There was one other person in that gate area who did not look away. A man in civilian clothes, in the last row of the gate seating, a row back from the windows, holding a cup of black coffee from the Delta Sky Club that he had not touched since he sat down. It was 61 years old, broad through the shoulders, the kind of man who takes up space not by expanding but by being very settled in where he is. He wore a dark gray wool overcoat over a plain white shirt, no luggage except a single black briefcase on the seat beside him. He had been watching from the moment Schiff walked up to the boarding line, watching the ID produced, watching the bag set on the ground, watching the handcuffs. And when the handcuffs went on, he set his untouched coffee on the armrest, picked up his briefcase, and stood. His name was Lieutenant General Marcus Adewale Mensah Kofi, Commanding General of the 1st Corps at Joint Base Lewis McChord. He had 41 years of service and 3 Silver Stars. Annie had learned, somewhere around year 15, that civilians in airports behave differently around a man in 4 stars than around a man in a gray wool coat. And he preferred, when had the option, to travel in the gray coat and see how the world conducted itself when it did not know it was being observed. What it was doing right now was not something he was going to walk past. Sergeant First Class Tobena Nwosu was 33 years old, 195 pounds, and he had been in the United States Army for 11 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Not a count he kept on a calendar, but one his body maintained with the precision of accumulated experience, the way bodies keep accurate time on the things they have been asked to carry. He had deployed twice to Afghanistan, once to Kuwait, and completed 3 training rotations to Germany, South Korea, and Poland. He had been awarded the Army Commendation Medal twice, once for his actions during a complex attack on a forward operating base in Kandahar province in 2017, in which his squad held a breach point for 22 minutes against a sustained threat with 2 casualties and no fatalities, and once for leading a 12-person team through a live-fire training accident in 2021 that had the potential for catastrophic results and did not become one because of decisions. It made in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He did not talk about either commendation unless someone asked. When someone asked, he said he was doing his job. It was traveling to Lewis McChord because his unit was beginning a 6-week readiness cycle on Monday at 0600, and he had been on leave in Atlanta for 8 days visiting his mother, Nosi Nwosu, who had undergone hip replacement surgery at Emory University Hospital on March 4th. She had been a licensed practical nurse for 22 years, working back-to-back shifts at 2 different facilities in the Vine City neighborhood of Atlanta, where she had raised Tobena and his 2 sisters on a salary that required careful management and left nothing for accidents. And when the surgery date was confirmed, he had submitted his leave request the same afternoon without weighing it, because there was not a version of the situation in which her son was not there. It had been raised to stand up straight, speak clearly, and take care of what was his. His mother had said all 3 things so many times and in so many different contexts that they had stopped being instructions and become reflex. He pressed his uniforms because the uniform was the visible version of what he had agreed to be. He pressed it the night before with a small Rowenta travel iron he had bought at the PX at Fort Benning in 2013 for $34 and which still worked perfectly, and which he carried in the side pocket of his carry-on because he was not going to pay hotel rates for the pressing service and because he knew how to do it himself. The dress greens that morning were sharp at every crease. The name tape was straight. The boots had been done before he went to bed. He was 31 years old and 163 pounds when he first shipped out, and he was 33 years old and 195 pounds now. And the 32 pounds had put on in the intervening years were not from the Army's food, which he ate because it was there, but from 12 years of disciplined physical training that had transformed his body into something functional and durable, rather than decorative. He ran 6 miles every morning at Lewis McChord before the rest of the unit came to formation. He did not announce this. He simply did it the way he did most things, because the standard required it and he had agreed to the standard. He carried a single carry-on bag, black nylon, tactical design, a broken buckle on the left shoulder strap that he had been meaning to replace for 2 years and had not replaced because the bag worked, and replacing things that worked was a luxury of attention he had not gotten around to. Inside, a change of civilian clothes, toiletries, the Le Carré Novo his mother had pressed into his hands the evening before, saying it was good and she wanted to know what he thought of it. And in the flat zippered compartment at the bottom, a card in his mother's handwriting on light blue stationery from the pad she kept in her bedside drawer. He had not read it yet. He was saving it for the flight. He had his boarding pass in his right hand and was reading it, not because he had forgotten the seat, 24A, but because it was something to look at while he stood still. When Officer Schiff came across the terminal floor, Officer Randall Schiff was 34 years old and had been with the Atlanta Airport Police Division for 6 years and 3 months. He was 220 pounds, carried his weight across his shoulders, and wore his name tag on a uniform that was pressed, but not, a careful observer might note, pressed with the same consistency across the seams. The left front pleat slightly misaligned from its last cleaning, a detail that a man who had spent 11 years pressing his own uniform would notice, and that most people would not. He had no civilian complaints on record. 2 had been reviewed and determined to require no action. 6 had been reviewed and closed without further action. One was still pending as of that Saturday morning. He had never been suspended. He had completed his mandatory annual bias awareness training in September of the previous year, a 4-hour online certification course. An had passed with a score of 80 out of 100. His last performance review, filed by his supervising sergeant in January, had rated him satisfactory in 7 of 9 categories and exceeding standards in 2 physical fitness and punctuality. He had received the suspicious activity report at 6:41 a.m. on his radio. The report described a black male, tall military-style clothing, behaving in an agitated manner near Gate C12. He had come through the terminal from the security station 190 feet away, scanned the gate area at C12, found it unoccupied. Its last departure had been at 6:15 a.m. and continued down the concourse. He saw Tovena standing in the boarding line at C14 and made a decision in under 4 seconds. He did not review the specifics of the report before approaching. He did not check the distance between C12 and C14, which was 47 feet. He did not weigh the fact that the report described agitated behavior and that a man standing quietly in a boarding line holding a boarding pass, in a pressed military uniform, with a name tape and rank and unit patch, all of it exactly as it should be, representing an observable reality that matched the description in only one measurable respect. He had a report, and he had a man who fit part of it. And he had 6 years of unexamined institutional habit, and the 6 years won over all 3 of the other things. If this story is sitting somewhere in your body right now that you recognize, stay with me, because what happens in the next 4 minutes at Gate C14 is not something Officer Randall Schiff had any preparation for. And the thing that stops it is not loud, and it is not dramatic, and it does not announce itself until it is already standing 3 feet away. He asked Tovena to step out of the line. Tovena stepped out. He asked for identification and received it. Military ID and passport, produced together from a breast pocket, already in a sleeve. The kind of preparedness that belongs to a man who has shown his identification in serious contexts before and has stopped treating the request as anything other than a procedure to be completed efficiently. Schiff took the sleeve. He did not open it. He told Tovena to put his bag down. Tovena put it down. He told him to keep his hands visible. The hands came up, open, palms forward. Tovena sighed. I have a flight boarding at this gate. He said it in the level, unhurried tone of a man providing relevant information, not the tone of a man arguing. Eje stood at 11 toward the boarding line, which was now on Group 3. Schiff said, I understand that. I need you to come with me. Tovena said, Am I being detained? Schiff sighed, Watch your tone, sir. Tovena said, I'm not raising my voice. I'm asking whether I'm being detained under the law or whether I'm free to board my flight. And Schiff, who had heard that sentence before and who had learned across 6 years to treat that sentence as a form of obstruction rather than a legal question, reached for his cuffs. Tovena went still the way he had learned to go still in Kandahar in 2017, which was completely, without any movement that was not strictly necessary. He put his hands behind his back. He felt the metal on his wrists. He looked at the boarding line, and at the gate agent, and at the terminal ceiling, and he did not say anything further because he had done the calculation, and the calculation told him that this moment needed to end, not escalate, and the only way to make it end was to take himself out of it and let someone else bring the thing to its correct resolution. The someone else was already standing up across the gate area. At 6:49 a.m., General Mensakofi crossed the gate at a measured pace and stopped 3 feet from Officer Schiff. He said, On what basis is this soldier being detained? Schiff sighed, Sir, this is a security matter. I'll need you to step back. The general said, I understand that. I'm asking on what legal basis this soldier is being detained. Schiff sighed. He had received a report of suspicious activity and was conducting a standard inquiry. The general said, What specific suspicious activity did you personally observe prior to this contact? Schiff sighed. He was not required to disclose the details of an ongoing security inquiry to the public. The general said, He is a uniformed member of the United States Army traveling on government orders. He has produced valid military identification, standing in a commercial boarding line at his assigned gate. I am asking what you personally observed that constitutes grounds for detention. 4 seconds of silence in Terminal C. The boarding announcement for Flight 1184 came through the overhead speakers again. Final boarding. All passengers. The gate agent's hand rested on her scanner and did not move. Schiff sighed. "And who are you?" The general set his briefcase on the floor with a soft click of the latches and opened it. He produced a single laminated card and held it out between two fingers, the way a man holds something that does not need to perform itself to carry weight. Schiff took the card. He read it. He read it again. The card identified its holder as Lieutenant General Marcus A. Mensakofi, United States Army, and carried beside the photograph the insignia of 3 silver stars and the designation Commanding General. First Corps, JBLM. Schiff's hand came down. He stood with the card in it. The general said, "Remove those handcuffs." 4 words. Flat. Complete. The kind of sentence that does not have a question embedded in it anywhere and does not need one. The handcuffs came off at 6:51 a.m. Tovena stood still while they were removed. He rolled neither wrist. He looked at General Mensakofi, who looked back at him and said 2 things with his eyes: "Straighten your jacket, and we will discuss this correctly." Tovena straightened his jacket. He picked up his bag from the floor. He reached down and picked up the boarding pass that had fallen during the handcuffing. The general had already picked it up and was holding it out, and they walked to the gate together. The gate agent scanned both passes without a word. The door to the jetway was still open. They boarded. Officer Schiff stood in the gate area with the identification card still in his hand for 6 minutes after they disappeared down the jetway. Then, he went to the Terminal C security station. He wrote his incident report 3 times over the next 44 minutes, according to the timestamp log on the security office terminal. The first 2 attempts, revised and discarded before he settled on the third, which he submitted at 7:31 a.m. Flight 1184, was already over South Carolina by then. Tovena had the window seat, 24A. General Mensakofi had 24C. The middle seat between them was empty, which the travel office at Lewis McCord may or may not have arranged deliberately, and which neither man asked about. They did not talk for the first half hour. Tovena watched the city drop away below the left wing and become the flat green of early Georgia spring, and then the blue-gray Atlantic shoulder of the Carolinas. Anne reached into the bottom of his bag and found his mother's card, and read it. It was 3 paragraphs in her handwriting, which was small and precise, and took the same care with letters that she had taken with everything she did for 22 years of nursing. Not decorative, but exact. The first paragraph said she was proud of him. The second said she expected him to eat and sleep and not to spend the whole 6 weeks being the last one to leave the training ground. The third paragraph said, "I raised you to stand straight. You have done that. I see it every time I see you. Do not let anyone convince you that standing straight is something you need to justify." He put the card back in the zippered compartment with the boarding pass. Around the Tennessee border, the general asked about the readiness cycle. They talked about the Yakima rotation, about vehicle maintenance protocols, about a platoon sergeant situation in Charlie Company that the general had already heard about through the command channel, and that Tovena confirmed with the particular precision of a man who has learned to describe problems accurately and without editorializing. The conversation was professional and relaxed in the way that conversations are when both people in them know what they are. Somewhere over Idaho, the general asked about Tovena's mother. Tovena sighed she was recovering well and had wanted him to stay longer. The general said, "They always want you to stay longer." Tovena said, "Yes, sir." There was nothing more that required saying, and so nothing more was said. General Mensakofi's after-action report to the Department of the Army was filed the following Monday morning. It was 6 pages long. It documented the timeline precisely. 6:44 arrival, 6:47 handcuffing, 6:51 removal of restraints, 6:53 boarding, and included a formal request for review of the original suspicious activity report, including the identity of the person who filed it, the basis on which the report was made, and whether the description it contained had any factual relationship to the observable conduct of Sergeant First Class Nwosu at Gate C-14. It included a request for a Department of Homeland Security review of Terminal C's security protocols. It included a specific legal question for the Army Judge Advocate General's office regarding whether the detention of a uniformed service member traveling on government orders on the basis of a vague, third-party report, in the absence of any personally observed conduct, was consistent with federal statute, and it included a formal recommendation that the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport Police Division review its training curriculum with specific attention to the identification of military credentials and the legal framework governing stops and detentions. It did not call a press conference. He did not give interviews. He used the tools that 41 years had given him, which were the tools of institutional authority, precisely applied. The airport authorities' response arrived 9 days later. It outlined a mandatory retraining program for all Terminal C security personnel, military credential identification, the statutory framework governing the treatment of uniformed service members, and the protocols for evaluating third-party suspicious activity reports against independently observable conduct. The first training session was scheduled for a Thursday morning in April and would be held in the Terminal C security briefing room, 31 feet from Gate C-14. Officier Randall Schiff attended the Thursday session. He sat in the third row. The training ran 2 hours and 14 minutes. He did not speak during the closing question period. The civil matter, filed through private counsel retained by Sergeant First Class Nwosu, was settled by the City of Atlanta for $190,000 within 72 days. Tovena directed the full amount to the Vine City Neighborhood Legal Assistance Center, the organization that had provided free legal services to residents of his mother's neighborhood for 37 years and that had helped her, specifically, with a landlord dispute in 2009 that she had never fully told him about until the settlement check needed a destination. It told her where the money was going. She was quiet for a moment on the phone, the specific quiet that meant she was deciding how much to say. Then she said, "That is correct. General Marcus Adewale Mensah Kofi retired the following November after 42 years of service. His retirement ceremony was held at Joint Base Lewis McChord in a hangar on a gray Pacific Northwest morning with rain on the metal roof and 400 people inside and steam coming off the cups. In the first 3 rows, Tovena was in the second row. He had submitted his ceremonial attendance requests through proper channels 6 weeks prior, had it approved, and had pressed his uniform the night before with the Rowenta iron that still worked. In his retirement remarks, the general said many things. Near the end, he said, "The soldier who stands still and does not flinch when the world tells him he does not belong in the line he is standing in. That soldier is the most dangerous thing to every limit this country has ever placed on itself, because that soldier has made a decision to outlast the obstacle rather than break against it. And everything that limit tries to do after that, it is doing against time it no longer has." Tovena stood with the room when the ceremony ended, and he clapped, and he did not think about Gate C-14 with any particular intensity, because Gate C-14 was one morning in 11 years, and 11 years contains many mornings. And the measure of a man is not what any single morning tried to take from him, but what he carried forward out of it. Estill had the boarding pass. It was in the zippered compartment with his mother's card, and it would stay there. There is something specific about what it means to wear a uniform in a public space. Not the weight of the fabric, though dress greens in March are not light, but the weight of the agreement. The uniform asks you to be, at all times, exactly who you appear to be. It asks you to represent something larger than your personal state on any given morning. It asks for a precision that has nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with declaration. Tovena Nwosu had answered that asking for 11 years in 2 countries where people were actively trying to end him, and in 1 country where a man with a pair of handcuffs did not know what he was standing beside. What happened at Gate C-14 was not a failure of one man's character. It was a failure of institutional preparation, the kind that sends someone into a terminal without the knowledge to recognize what they are looking at, without the tools to distinguish a report from an observation, without the framework to understand that the question, "Am I being detained?" is not obstruction, but the legal system working exactly as designed. That failure has a repair. It is a Thursday morning session in a briefing room 31 feet from the place where the failure occurred. It is a 6-page report filed on a Monday morning through the correct channels. It is a settlement directed not to the person who was wronged, but to the neighborhood that raised him. That is not drama. That is architecture. And architecture is what lasts. You cannot determine who belongs in a boarding line by looking at the line. You cannot read 11 years of service from a gate area and a decision made in 4 seconds. You cannot know who is sitting in the last row of the gate seating with a cup of untouched coffee and a briefcase with one card inside it, watching everything, ready to stand up and cross that floor. And you cannot always know, in the moment you make a decision you have not examined carefully enough, what the weight of that decision is going to be, or who is already holding the correct tool to correct it. Leave your answer in the comments. If you had been standing in that Group 2 boarding line and you watched every second of this happen, not a soldier, not a general, just a person with a ticket in your hand, what would you have done? Most people say they would have spoken up. Most people, when the moment actually arrives, find something very important on their phone. I want to know which one you are. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.